Welcome to our Let's Talk TriDelta podcast. I'm Mindy Tucker. I'm TriDelta's CEO and your podcast host today. I'm really excited about our guest, Julie Qiu, who is from the Alpha Tau chapter at Carnegie Mellon. She is an entrepreneur, a marketer, a pioneer, get this, in the world of oyster appreciation and sustainability. I can't think of anything more TriDelta right now. If we think about where the pearl comes from, our beloved symbol, today we're going to get to talk a little bit about oysters and learn a little bit more about the thing that creates our beautiful, beautiful jewel in TriDelta. Julie is the founder of In a Half Shell. It's a long-running blog exploring global oyster culture. She's the founder of the Oyster Master Guild. That's the first professional training and certification for oyster sommeliers. You might say she's doing for oysters what sommeliers did for wine. I really can't wait to dive into this conversation with you, Julie. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's, before we get into the oysters and what you're doing now, I want to talk a little bit about you and your background. How did you go from being a toddler in Shanghai to a college student at Carnegie Mellon?
Wow, so that's quite a span of years. I'll do my best. Well, I was born in Shanghai. My entire family is from China, and my parents, I think they were probably adventurous at their age, well-educated, kind of wanting to do something different. They decided that they wanted to go and pursue the American dream. So my dad actually started a graduate program in Boston, and my mom and I came over when I was about 5 years old, and we decided just to settle down in the Midwest, in Indiana of all states, and that's where I grew up. I think typically when you think about Asian families, parents have very high expectations for their children, especially only children. And so even though they were a little different from other Asian parents, like to tell them to be like doctors and lawyers, they kind of just wanted me to be happy and successful in whatever I wanted to pursue. At an early age, I think I really gravitated to creative arts, drawing, design, photography, storytelling. But on the other hand, I was a little bit of a nerd. I like math, I like science. And so Carnegie Mellon seemed like a very good fit because they had a wonderful design program, a great business school. And that's ultimately where I chose to do my 4 years.
Okay. Where in Indiana did you guys locate?
In Bloomington, Indiana, where Indiana University is. So I had a good exposure to what college life could be like.
Okay. Yeah.
Roaming around campus and all that. But I definitely wanted a change of scenery.
Did you know about Greek life before you got to college?
Not directly, but when I would go to my piano lessons at IU, we would pass by these gorgeous, enormous houses, and I always wondered what those were. And lo and behold, they were the sorority and fraternity houses.
Yeah, they have that's a pretty thriving Greek community at Indiana. So,
yes, indeed.
I wondered if that had influenced your outlook at all. And so, when you get to Carnegie Mellon, what drew you into joining a sorority and choosing TriDelta?
Right. So this was actually before I even got to college. I think, I'm not sure what in me wanted to feel a little bit more secure. Maybe it was because I didn't know anybody going to Carnegie Mellon at the time, and I really wanted to know somebody when I got there. So the internet was starting to be a thing, and I would go online and there would be these online blogging communities, and I went into one and I found myself someone who went to Carnegie Mellon by just doing some research. I approached this young woman who I think at the time was a sophomore. And I was like, hey, I'm coming in as incoming freshman, wondering if, we can connect, so that I just didn't feel super alone. And she was very grateful, friendly, and welcomed me in and said, we should definitely connect when you're here. And that young woman was named Allison Lynn, who is also a TriDel.
I love it.
She was like, have you ever considered joining a sorority? And I was like, no, what's that? And kind of showed me around. Actually, also another thing that happened before classes even began was when I was previewing the school. I had the opportunity to go and spend the night there, and a couple of the hosts were also sorority girls. So I kind of had more of an idea of what it was like at Carnegie Mellon specifically, and they seemed really a wonderful, amazing, well connected with the social life. So I thought this might be a good idea to join.
I love it. They spotted you, knew you were a standout, and brought you along. I love it when we do that. So you get done at college and you go into advertising and brand consulting in your career. That's the first thing you do. Tell me a little bit about what that looked like.
Yes. So during my junior year, I had an opportunity to do an internship at an advertising agency in New York City. So this was part of a multicultural advertising intern program where we were placed in the best agencies really in New York. So the ones that were covering just great global clients. I really fell in love with that work early on. And after graduating, I knew that I wanted to go to New York to be a part of that industry, to work on all these creative brands, businesses, kind of get immersed in a lot of different types of businesses and brands at that early stage. So I got a job with in 2006. I landed a job with the agency that just happened to be named Agency of the Year. So that was exciting. And but the account that I was on, well, actually, it was actually a really fun one. It was Jaguar cars. So starting out, that was the account that I was working on as an account executive, which I quickly realized I would rather go into the strategy side. So I started developing the skills in account planning, market research to ultimately move me into that position at that agency. It was. I really liked the work at the time, but part of me felt like there could be more. Like I really wanted more purpose and meaning in the types of clients that I wanted to pursue.
Okay.
So after a little bit of time there, I jumped to a different boutique agency where we specialized in reaching trendy millennials when we were all still very much younger, but this was like 15 years ago. And through there, that's when I kind of realized like my passion was in food and sustainable food systems. And during that time, I started in a half shell as well.
Okay. So this is where we're going to make the connection around your passion, which is so you have a passion for food. Maybe talk a little bit about that and how you brought those two together and how it turned into this blog.
Yeah. I met my now husband, then boyfriend, in the city, and we moved in together and we started cooking a lot, eating out a lot. And of course, New York has such a diverse array of foods. And so we did a lot of exploration together. And I think that's how I got started in doing some food blogging. Ultimately, there were three things that came to mind before starting my oyster blog, which was reading a book about oysters by Rowan Jacobson. It's called A Geography of Oysters. If anybody wants to get on the topic, that's like a really good place to start. I also joined a New York oyster lovers meetup group, which is a lot of fun. We would just go to different oyster bars around the city and have these amazing tasting menus curated by these top chefs of raw oysters, dressed oysters, and sometimes they even showed off with like an oyster dessert. And then finally, we did this great trip to San Francisco where I got a chance to visit Hog Island Oyster Farm. And after those three things, I kind of was convinced that the topic of oysters, which is so fascinating, and I loved eating them, that I wanted to learn more. So it was really to kind of document my adventures along the way. But being the curious person that I am, I started asking just a lot of questions to the chefs who didn't know how to answer me. So they directed me to their wholesalers, who then ultimately directed me to the producers themselves. And when I got to my first oyster farm, it was kind of life-changing. I thought that it was in Martha's Vineyard on the Cape, and it was just very eye-opening, like the type of work that needs to happen in order to bring that type of product to market. And none of that was being told at the raw bar. So I was just thinking to myself, like, why do I bring these stories to life in my blog?
So, do you remember your first oyster?
Yes, but it was when I was a teenager. I remember this clearly. I was 15. I was visiting an uncle who lived in San Diego, and it was
Okay, that's where I live. Yeah. Okay.
perfect. So it was this like this very cool seafood restaurant on a pier, maybe, and they had a really extensive oyster menu. And at that age, Uncle was treating, so I'm like, well, let's go to town, let's try all the oysters. And I ordered, the whole menu for the table, and I distinctly remember liking some of them a lot and not liking some other ones very much. And that kind of stuck with me. That was my first raw oyster experience, but it wasn't until like maybe almost 10 years later in New York City when we got a chance to enjoy oyster happy hours in the city. So all these amazing bars and restaurants were doing oyster happy hours, and then that's where I came back to trying new ones and then finally like remembering what I was trying.
Okay, that's fascinating. I just wonder if you remember sort of where that spark came from at the beginning. And now, what's the status of the blog? How's it going? Where have you taken it?
It's wow. So it's been quite some time since 2009. I have kept up the blogging to a point. I am the world's slowest writer, to be honest. So it's every post will take months. These trips, like I do, I digest the information a lot and kind of am very thoughtful about the output. So the blog has always been up and running. I haven't written much between like 2020 to 2025. Like, of course, all these things just happened in my life during that time, but I was still active very much on Instagram. I think Instagram kind of took over after a while as my main publication or platform to use. In a Half Shell has now, I suppose, become one of the authorities on global oyster appreciation. A lot of people who are curious about oysters but don't know much about them find In a Half Shell and can learn more, as the same way that I did when I was just starting out. I had a book, I had some questions, and my blog helps answer a lot of them for consumers. I would say after spending about a decade in advertising, I decided at that time I was ready to try and pursue something different, which was to do my own consulting. And it was also a time when I thought I could develop In a Half Shell into a more robust platform, and also maybe try my hand at creating some products that would supplement the blog itself, like an oyster tasting journal, a New York oyster map, and then started doing my own oyster tasting classes in the city. So I would host these classes in restaurants or in pop-up spaces where I would take people through 3 different oysters, tell them the stories of each of these oysters, the same way that you would do with wine, and also pair them with wine as well. So I did that for a couple of years until I was recruited by a seafood company to become their director of global marketing. And at the time, so this was an interesting pivot, because I thought I was pretty happy doing consulting on my own, but then on the flip side, this opportunity would allow me to understand that global seafood supply chain from the producer's point of view. And I thought that would be really valuable experience. So then I accepted, thinking naively, because this wasn't oyster farming, this is actually a fish farming company. I was naive, thinking, how different could they be? And it's truly like night and day, like the difference between vegetable farming and cattle farming. That's that dramatic. But I spent 8 years there, and along the way, I really developed a robust understanding of the seafood supply chain, and also the challenges and opportunities that producers would face, as well as consumers and how they would approach seafood, especially in the US, where seafood consumption is actually surprisingly low compared to a lot of other countries around the world.
So First of all, like you can sense your curiosity about this topic and maybe all topics. I feel like this is maybe how you approach things in general, which is it's so infectious. I think like you just want to dig and learn more, and it's so interesting to sort of hear you talk about how you dug in and then you learned this and then it took you here, which I love as sort of a life map. We plan things out and then our curiosity gets the best of us and we end up doing something we never knew we'd do. So it's fun to hear about your journey and how this all sort of played out. And how you've turned it into so many different things. I'm fascinated by that as well, because I think it's hard to find a new angle on things, but it sounds like you're sort of constantly doing that. And one of the things you did that was new was this Oyster Master Guild. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and how that came about, you creating this whole new organization?
Yeah. Well, as I was blogging and starting to become less of a consumer and documenter of oyster culture, I started wanting to improve it in ways like educating and kind of putting more knowledge out there in the space for people to kind of level up their half shell experience is how I would position it. I ultimately felt like I became a consumer who knew too much. And so whenever I would go into these oyster bars and high-end seafood restaurants, I would get so frustrated with how badly the oysters are shucked and how little the servers knew about oysters. And I was just like stunned because it takes years and years of hard work for these growers to bring that oyster to market, for only a shucker to completely massacre the oyster on your plate and then for the server not to know where they come from. I thought that was just kind of criminal, to be honest, and it wasn't going to be sustainable for the business. So Oyster Master Guild came out of that frustration of wanting to create something better. Like I imagined if they could do it with wine, and you can learn so much about wine from wine sommeliers, and even like your favorite barista being able to bring like a coffee to life for you, or your cheesemonger telling you about these amazing stories about these different cheeses and how they're produced, what the animals are eating and how that impacts the flavor. Chocolate is another one, beer is another one. And it's like, why couldn't you do this with oysters? I think you could. And lo and behold, there were several other people who had the same idea. One in particular is my co-founder, Patrick McMurray, who is a world oyster champion shucker. He is an author on an oyster book. He had several successful oyster bars in Toronto. He's kind of considered one of the OGs of the oyster scene, like in the 90s. And he and I met in Ireland at the World Oyster Opening Championship in Galway.
Can't make this stuff up.
No, I kid you not. This was, the oyster world is small. So all these things, like they all kind of make sense. And we all somehow find each other, and we kept in touch. And Patrick and I, we were kind of approaching this idea from those two different perspectives, him from the hospitality side, me from a consumer and storytelling side. And in 2023, we finally decided, after circling around this idea for a while, like to finally do it. I was very, very lucky, or we were very lucky to get an early break in national media that we did. So what had happened was, we had this concept and we were shopping it around. I was just telling some of my most trusted oyster friends, like oyster bar owners, growers, about what we intended to do. And the people were very receptive to it. One organization in particular got really, really excited, and the general manager at a restaurant called Crave Fish Bar on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, he was just laser focused. As soon as he heard, there could be a oyster sommelier course and certification, like he was in, like, this is what I want to do. That's what I want to be. And so he started telling his customers about it. And one of them happened to be the editor-in-chief of USA Today. So this ended up being a big story that they chased. It turned into a podcast for them. And that was in 2023. And so at the time, we were like, Patrick, we kind of have to do this now because we can't give up on this.
We said it out loud. How it has to be done.
Yeah, we had the concept, right? But it was just about putting it down on paper. It's like, we have to do this. And I figured out I had to learn very quickly how online learning management systems worked. But it was, after the pandemic, everybody was doing webinars, Zooms, like people were used to learning things online. So I'm like, that seems like it could be a no-brainer, right? Like online learning, we can do a live session first, record it, edit it, and then put the rest of the courses online. And that's how it all started. So now a couple years in, I think we've just had our 500th student enroll in like our collection of courses, and we've gotten about 130 level 1 certified Oyster ambassadors from over 13 countries around the world. So it's been pretty exciting to see, how we've been able to attract the same level of enthusiasm and curiosity that we have to the world of oysters.
I love that. Okay, so I'm going to go to expert. I'm going to go from expert to beginner here for a minute. I have an assumption that's probably wrong now that I've heard you talk about your first oyster experience, but you either love oysters or you don't. And I don't know if that's true or not. You said your first time you had some you liked a lot and some you didn't like a lot.
Yeah.
So do you have advice for somebody, like somebody's listening, they've never had an oyster, they have no idea what this is about. What is your advice to them to sort of start down this road and start trying oysters?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're not wrong. Oysters are very polarizing, so I think you're never like neutral, like this is a sandwich meh about oysters. You really do. You're either a big fan or you're very reluctant about oysters because they're not a hot dog, right? It's a real.
I'm pretty opinionated about hot dogs.
That's fair. Not an apple, not like not a slice of pizza. But I think because I grew up in Shanghai, where a lot of the cuisine is centered around seafood, I think I just grew up at a young age eating all sorts of types of seafood that I was very familiar and happy with the texture and those types of flavors. Other people, I will say, probably did not grow up next to seafood or were not exposed to it at an early age. And so I think the flavors and the textures are very, very new to them. Right. And if you're that kind of person, completely understand. It's going to be a little bit of maybe an uphill battle or just, taking your first roller coaster and seeing how it goes. But I would suggest if you did want to start maybe, and a little squeamish about texture, trying cooked oysters first so that the texture is a little bit firmer and the flavor is mild and layered with dressings that just make the oysters, very yummy. But if you want to do a raw one, starting small, starting mild is where I would suggest you going. So hopefully, if you go to an oyster bar, maybe that has one of our certified specialists, they will be able to direct you to a delicate tasting oyster. And then you can decide from there if you like that or not. So I think that's how I would approach it. But I would say, from a nutrition side, you really can't eat a healthier food. Oysters are so nutritionally dense. They're very sustainable, and they're just good. There's nothing to dislike really about them. So on that end, I would say I would encourage everybody to give it a shot.
Love it. I'm thinking about the two kids in my house and like my one adventurous eater and my one who is happy with mac and cheese and how different people approach food. So I think that's a good entry point. So thanks for that. You have been obviously all over the world. You've lived and worked all over the place. One of the things, I know you keep going down different roads, but another road that you've been down is something called aquaculture. And so I wanted to give you a chance to tell us what that is and how you've learned it affects the taste and quality of seafood.
Absolutely. So, like I mentioned, I spent 8 years as the global marketing director for a seafood company. They were aquaculture company raising finfish in the ocean. And I would say that aquaculture is as vast as agriculture. Basically, it's essentially agriculture, but just done in the water. So you're cultivating plants, different mollusks, shrimp, crustaceans, finfish in the water in a controlled environment. You're raising them from the very beginning, from like hatchlings to seed to growing them out to harvesting. That entire cycle is what aquaculture is. And with that, I would say there's the taste and quality of farmed seafood ultimately depends on how and where it's grown. So farm seafood inherently isn't better or worse than wild harvested or wild forage seafood, as long as you can know what the animal is eating and how it's being treated. So in the world of seafood, there is a commercial divide, I would say, and timing between when farm seafood is available and wild seafood is available. And you can do things right or wrong in either case. For oysters in particular, and for actually all mollusks, the unique thing about them is that people don't have to feed them anything. We place them in the water and they're filter feeding phytoplankton. And what that means is that with a wild oyster and a farmed oyster is essentially eating the same thing. It's that the difference is the farmed oyster is being kind of manicured, being kept clean, being protected from predators, being washed regularly, being handled so that they grow to be this beautiful, perfect shape that is ideal for the half-shell market. Wild oysters are seasonal. Farmed oysters can be available year-long. Wild oysters are kind of wonky shapes, so it makes it very challenging for shuckers to open sometimes. Farmed oysters are now just like they basically open themselves. You don't have to use a lot of force or anything. They're just really nice, like the well curated brands are. So from a taste standpoint, I'd say the flavors that you're going to get between the two are going to be virtually the same. You might get a little bit more sweetness and fatness in a farmed oyster just because they have been pampered and conditioned to have really good meat content. Whereas it can be a bit more variable with wild oysters. And the quality, like I mentioned, the shuckability, if you will, is a quality indicator in the biz, because when you imagine oyster bars having to go through thousands of oysters, you really want them to be consistent and easy to open and also have a good shelf life, which is another key factor. Okay. So it's that's just one piece of the big puzzle of aquaculture, but ultimately I think that farming the oceans is the part of the future of our food system, and we need to think about how to do it responsibly, and kind of do it in a way that allows like our wild fisheries to recover. And yeah, I think that's what it all comes down to.
Yeah. There's a lot packed in there. Shuckability. That's a new word for all of us. So I assume like you didn't grow up thinking someday I'm going to have a blog about oysters. But it's clearly a passion that you went after. What advice do you have for people about following an unexpected passion like this?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I I guess I've always been a kind of person. I think I was raised to be the kind of person to just give things a shot and with no expectations. I don't think that it hurts by any means. And maybe down the road, when you pursue something that you're interested in and it doesn't seem to pan out, it might actually have some purpose indirectly to something else that you're doing. Like, for example, I think that I've been able to cultivate a lot of cool skills in college, not directly related to a lot of my business courses, but through design, like being able to put together marketing materials, a website on my own. That's been very helpful as a small business owner and in my marketing positions. And then also learning about other industries, I think, is really fascinating, where you can maybe, if you learn about two very different things and happen to find something that intersects in the middle, that's where like these new ideas come from, is putting two different things together. So for people who, are dabbling, I guess the biggest lesson is like, don't be afraid to look stupid because you're gonna, and you just have to get over it in order to put yourself out there and learn, right? And I think it's really the fear of being wrong, making a mistake, looking idiotic is what's holding people back from discovering the things that they will ultimately love.
Yeah, that's great advice. Is there anything that you learned in Tri Delta that still shows up for you today in your work or your life and the things that you're doing?
I think being in Tri Delta and being in that kind of organization has really taught me a lot about teamwork, about working with different types of people. I think it prepares you quite well for just life outside of college, where you have to deal with a lot of different people, different types of businesses, how you manage conflict, how you manage deadlines sometimes. So I think it's delivered like a lot of interesting professional skills. And of course, I do have very good friends who were my sorority sisters that I still keep in touch with in the city. Like the one who introduced me to Tridel, I just had dinner with her in the city when she was in town for business. And also several others who have really, we kind of share that common bond, but also shared values that we discovered while in college.
Yeah, I love that. What is next for you? Where do you take it from here?
Oh gosh. Well, so OMG is my full-time thing. We have been working on developing a four level program. So similar to wine education, some of the top wine educators have a structured program like that. We have one as well. We're about to launch our level 3, which is the first professional standard in the oyster service industry. So I guess that's going to be trying to define something new, setting a benchmark for what good oyster service and presentation is, and what we hope oyster bars will strive to. I kind of joke around saying like it's really a selfish endeavor, because all I want to do is go into any oyster bar and have a really nicely shucked platter of oysters and have people who know what they're talking about so I can enjoy it. But hopefully others will be able to do that as well once we get a lot of new people through this program. And I think that will be the focus for the next year or so, and we will see. My vision, my dream would be to have like an awards for oyster people, oyster professionals, and oyster service, the same way like James Beard does their awards. I think there should be one for oyster service and oyster hospitality.
Yeah, I love it. I just need you to know, in the future now, I'm seeing a Tri Delta event in New York where you lead everybody through an oyster tasting. So that is coming. That is
I'm ready.
one of my dreams. So, well, I want to make sure our listeners can find you and follow you and learn more about what you're up to. So where can they sort of reach out and connect with you?
My personal Instagram is probably the best. In a half shell ist is my handle. Oyster Master Guild is Oyster Master Guilds on Instagram. And the two websites are inahalfshell.com and oystermasterguild.com.
Okay, great. Well, I hope anyone out there interested in oysters goes and learns a little bit more about Julie and what she's up to. I cannot thank you enough for coming and sharing with us today. This was a fun conversation. I should ask you one more question. Did you learn anything interesting about the pearl and how it's made all of this?
So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, maybe a little bit, but the oysters that we eat are not the same ones that produce the pretty pearls. Yeah. That species is a saltwater tropical oyster, specifically bred, farmed to develop those pearls. However, it is You can find odd looking pearls in some oysters. There's definitely, I follow a lot of shuckers on Instagram, and some of them just get so lucky with how many pearls that they find in oysters. I almost think like it's been strategically placed there for PR value, but
Yeah.
who knows? But a pearl is, yeah, the pearl is,
Rare. We know it's rare. So.
yes, rare and a really fun novelty. Definitely something worth telling a story about in the restaurant and raw bar.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been so fun. We wish you all the best and hope to see you soon on some oyster event. It's in my mind. It's going to happen.
It is going to happen. I have no doubt.
Well, thanks for being with us today. And thanks to everybody else for joining us and listening in. Such a fun conversation. I hope that all of you are connected to TriDelta. If you're not and you don't have a My TriDelta account, you may be missing out on some of the latest information and opportunities about TriDelta. So go to tridelta.org and click on My TriDelta to claim your account and make sure you are in the loop of what's going on at TriDelta. We hope you'll like, subscribe, and rate our podcast. We have 3 stars in our Crescent, but we love those 5-star ratings, so bring them on. Thanks for joining us today, and until next time, Delta Love.